Black woman is humiliated on a plane when they find out who her son is. Hello, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport was buzzing with activity that summer morning. Among the crowd of hurried travelers, Jamila Carter stood out, not only for her elegant and determined posture, but also for the intensity with which her eyes scrolled across the screen of her cell phone. Wearing an impeccable navy blue suit, she emanated an aura of confidence that masked the anxiety boiling inside her. Flight 1523 to Los Angeles, last call for boarding at Gate 27. A metallic voice announced over the airport PA system. Jamila took a deep breath, put her cell phone back in her purse, and walked towards the gate. Each step took her closer to the moment that could change her life and the lives of countless others. In her mind, the slides of the presentation she had spent all night reviewing danced like a looping movie. As she boarded the plane, Jamila felt the weight of expectations on her shoulders. She found her seat in business class and settled in, immediately taking her laptop out of her bag. The 5.5-hour flight to Los Angeles would be her last chance to perfect every detail of her proposal. "Excuse me, that's my seat," said a voice next to her. Jamila looked up and saw a middle-aged man with grey hair and an expensive suit. He indicated the window seat. "Sure, sorry," she replied, getting up to make way. The man settled in, casting a curious glance at Jamila's laptop screen. "Business in LA?" he asked, his tone fluctuating between interest and condescension. "Yes," Jamila replied succinctly, hoping to end the conversation there. But the man, who introduced himself as Richard, seemed determined to talk. "You know, I see a lot of people like you on these flights. Young entrepreneurs full of dreams, thinking they're going to change the world." He laughed, a sound that made Jamila cringe internally. "I don't want to discourage you, but the business world is unforgiving, especially for, well, you know." Jamila felt a knot forming in her stomach. She was well aware of this kind of veiled comment, the microaggressions she faced daily as a black woman in the corporate world. But years of experience had taught her to keep her composure. "I appreciate your concern," she replied, maintaining a neutral tone, "but I'd rather concentrate on my work now." Richard shrugged and turned his attention back to the in-flight magazine, while Jamila dived back into her slides, determined not to let this encounter undermine her confidence. As the plane gained altitude, Jamila closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself a brief trip back in time. She remembered her childhood in the Bronx, the nights her mother worked 2 jobs to support her, the high school teacher who saw her potential and encouraged her to dream big. Every obstacle she had overcome, every door slammed in her face, every no she had heard along the way, all of it had made her stronger, shaping her into the determined woman she was today. And now, about to present her innovative assistive technology startup to a group of investors in Silicon Beach, Jamila knew she was on the verge of something big. The soft sound of a notification on her cell phone brought her back to the present. It was a message from her son, Malik. "You're going to rock, Mom. I'm proud of you. Love you." A genuine smile lit up Jamila's face for the first time that day. Malik, her 16-year-old prodigy, was her greatest source of inspiration and strength. It was with him and all the children facing similar challenges in mind that she founded her company. With renewed determination, Jamila turned her attention to the presentation. The next few hours would be crucial, and she was ready to face any challenge that came her way. Little did she know that the flight to Los Angeles would be just the beginning of a journey that would test not only her professional resilience, but also her strength as a woman, mother, and leader. American Airlines Flight 1523 was crossing the skies over the American Midwest, leaving behind the twinkling lights of New York. Jamila Carter, absorbed in her work, barely noticed the first 2 hours of the flight passing by. Her concentration was only broken when the pilot announced that they were entering an area of turbulence. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We are anticipating some turbulence in the next few minutes." Jamila saved her work and closed her laptop, looking out of the window. The dark clouds outside seemed to reflect the anxiety growing inside her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm down. You've faced worse, she muttered to herself. Richard, her seat neighbor, seemed to misinterpret her nervousness. "First time flying?" he asked, with a smile that bordered on condescending. "No," Jamila replied dryly. "I just prefer to keep my feet on the ground when I'm working on something important." "Ah, yes, your big project," Richard commented, leaning over to look at Jamila's laptop screen. "You know, I've seen a lot of startups come and go. Most of them don't make it past the first year, especially when they're led by, well, people without the necessary experience." Jamila felt her blood boil, but kept her composure. "I'm sure your experience is vast, sir." "Holloway. Richard Holloway," he replied, puffing out his chest. "I'm Vice President of Techlumina Corporation." The name was familiar. Jamila remembered seeing Techlumina on the list of potential investors for her presentation in Los Angeles. She hesitated for a moment, torn between defending herself and maintaining a professional attitude. "Mr. Holloway, I appreciate your perspective," she finally said, choosing her words carefully. "But I believe that innovation and social impact know no barriers of age, gender, or color." Richard seemed surprised by Jamila's firm response. Before he could respond, a strong jolt from the plane caused several passengers to let out startled exclamations. Taking advantage of the distraction, Jamila took out her cell phone and opened the photo gallery. The image of Malik, smiling next to a prototype of the app they had developed together, brought a smile to her face. She remembered the day her son, then just 14, had come to her with the idea that would become the basis of their startup. "Mom," Malik had said, his eyes shining with enthusiasm, "what if we could create something that helped people like Grandma communicate better?" Jamila's mother had suffered a stroke years before, leaving her with speech difficulties. Malik's idea was to develop a communication assistance app that would be accessible and easy to use, especially for underprivileged communities. Lost in her memories, Jamila almost didn't notice when the turbulence finally ceased. The pilot announced that the rest of the flight would be uneventful, and the passengers let out collective sighs of relief. "Do you have children, Mr. Holloway?" Jamila asked suddenly, surprising Richard. Yes. 2. Why?" Jamila smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Because sometimes real innovation comes from unexpected places. My 16-year-old son is the brains behind the technology I'm going to present in LA." She then began to explain the project, her voice full of passion and conviction. As she spoke, Richard's expression changed from skepticism to curiosity, and finally to genuine interest. When Jamila finished, Richard was leaning towards her, completely engaged. "That's impressive," he admitted. "Perhaps I was hasty in my judgments." Jamila nodded, accepting the veiled admission. "Sometimes, Mr. Holloway, all we need is a chance to prove ourselves." As the plane continued on its way west, Jamila felt a wave of renewed confidence. The turbulence, both literal and metaphorical, had passed. Now, with Los Angeles looming on the horizon, she was more determined than ever to make her dream, and Malik's, a reality. Flight 1523 was halfway to Los Angeles when the atmosphere in the cabin began to change. Jamila Carter, having finished her surprisingly productive conversation with Richard Holloway, turned her attention to making the final adjustments to her presentation. The relative silence of the booth was broken by a notification on her cell phone. "Ms. Carter," the message read, "we have confirmed your meeting with the Board of Investors tomorrow at 10 a.m. We await your presentation with great interest. Skyline Ventures." Jamila felt a surge of adrenaline run through her body. This was the opportunity she and Malik had worked tirelessly for. Taking a deep breath, she began to mentally review each point of her presentation. Meanwhile, a few rows back, a middle-aged man called Frank Peterson was watching Jamila with growing agitation. Since boarding, he hadn't been able to take his eyes off her, his discomfort growing by the minute. "Excuse me," Frank called out to a flight attendant. "That woman up front. She seems to be fiddling with something suspicious on her cell phone." The flight attendant, a young woman called Lisa, looked in the direction indicated. "Sir, she just seems to be working on her laptop. I don't see anything suspicious." Frank insisted, his voice getting louder. "You don't understand. She's been acting strangely ever since we boarded. Always typing, looking around. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you? Lisa tried to calm Frank down, but her raised voice began to attract the attention of the other passengers. Murmurs of concern began to spread through the cabin. Jamila, absorbed in her thoughts, initially didn't notice the commotion forming. It was only when she heard the word suspicious being repeated that she finally looked around, realizing with a tightness in her chest that she was the center of attention. "What's going on?" she asked Richard, who looked equally confused. Before he could answer, Frank rose from his seat, pointing at Jamila. "Her! She's planning something, I'm sure of it." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jamila felt the blood drain from her face as looks of fear and suspicion turned to her. Years of experience with prejudice and discrimination had not prepared her for this moment. "Sir, please calm down," Lisa tried to intervene, but Frank was out of control. "You don't understand. She's a threat. We need to do something before it's too late." Panic began to spread among the passengers. Some turned away from Jamila, while others began to wonder aloud what she could be up to. Richard, surprising even himself, stood up. "This is ridiculous. I was sitting next to her the whole flight. She's a businesswoman on her way to an important meeting." But his words seemed to get lost in the growing chaos. Jamila, feeling the weight of dozens of accusing stares, struggled to keep her composure. She knew that any overreaction on her part would only make matters worse. "Please," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just a passenger like all of you. I'm going to a business meeting in Los Angeles." Her words, however, seemed to fall on deaf ears. Fear and prejudice had set in, fueled by Frank's unfounded paranoia. As the situation deteriorated, Jamila couldn't help but think of Malik. What would he do if he were here? How would he react to his mother being wrongly accused? It was at this moment of despair that Jamila heard a young, determined voice rise above the tumult. "Stop! You're making a terrible mistake." All eyes turned to the corridor, where a black teenager stood up, his eyes shining with a mixture of anger and determination. Jamila felt her heart leap. It was Malik. The silence that followed Malik's intervention was deafening. All eyes in the cabin turned to the 16-year-old who was now standing in the aisle, his face a mixture of determination and indignation. Jamila felt her heart racing, a mixture of pride and worry taking hold of her. "My name is Malik Carter," he began, his firm voice echoing through the cabin. "And that woman you are wrongly accusing is my mother, Jamila Carter." Frank, the passenger who had started the ruckus, looked momentarily disconcerted. "That doesn't change anything," he argued, albeit with less conviction. "She could still be dangerous." Malik stepped forward, his eyes shining with a maturity beyond his years. "Dangerous? Let me tell you who Jamila Carter really is." He took his cell phone out of his pocket and, with a few quick taps, projected an image onto the screen of the seat in front of him. It was a photo of Jamila in a laboratory, surrounded by a diverse team. "My mother is one of the brightest minds in assistive technology in the United States," Malik explained, his voice charged with emotion. "She founded a startup that is developing apps to help people with communication difficulties, such as stroke victims or individuals with autism." A murmur of interest ran through the cabin. Even Frank seemed to hesitate. Malik continued, moving on to another image. This time, a video of Jamila speaking at a conference. Last year, she was invited to speak at TechCrunch Disrupt in San Francisco. Her work is changing lives, giving a voice to those who have been silenced by their conditions. The atmosphere in the booth began to change. The looks of suspicion were gradually replaced by expressions of curiosity and, in some cases, shame. "And do you know what she's doing right now?" Malik asked, his voice trembling slightly. "She's reviewing a presentation for a crucial meeting in Los Angeles. A meeting that could secure funding to expand our project and help even more people." Jamila watched her son with tears in her eyes, unable to believe the courage and eloquence he displayed. Richard Holloway, the executive sitting next to Jamila, stood up. "The boy is telling the truth," he said. "I've spent the last few hours talking to Mrs. Carter about your project. It's revolutionary." The flight attendant, Lisa, who had tried to calm the situation down earlier, approached Frank. Sir, I think we owe Mrs. Carter an apology. Frank seemed to be struggling internally, his face a mixture of confusion and regret. I didn't know, he muttered. Malik approached his mother, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. It's easy to judge someone based on prejudices and unfounded fears, he said, addressing everyone in the cabin. But every person has a story, dreams, and the potential to make a difference in the world. My mother taught me that. Spontaneous applause erupted in the cabin. Passengers stood up, some with tears in their eyes, others smiling and waving in support of Jamila and Malik. Frank, visibly embarrassed, approached hesitantly. Mrs. Carter, I sincerely apologize. My behavior was unforgivable. Jamila, regaining her composure, looked at Frank with a mixture of understanding and firmness. Learning from our mistakes and growing is what makes us human, Mr. Peterson. I hope this experience teaches us all about the danger of rash judgments. As the situation calmed down and the passengers returned to their seats, Jamila hugged Malik, whispering words of pride and gratitude. The rest of the flight passed in an atmosphere of reflection and, for many, a change of perspective. As they approached Los Angeles, Jamila looked out of the window, the city skyline beginning to appear in the distance. She knew that, regardless of the outcome of the meeting that awaited her, she had already won something much more valuable: living proof that education, empathy, and courage can overcome prejudice and ignorance. As American Airlines Flight 1523 continued its journey towards Los Angeles, the atmosphere in the cabin had completely changed. What had once been an environment of tension and suspicion had now become a space for reflection and human connection. Jamila Carter, still moved by her son Malik's courageous intervention, observed the passengers around her. Many of them now looked at her with a mixture of admiration and regret. The truth about who she was and the important work she was doing had dispelled the unfounded fear that moments before had threatened to ruin her trip. "Mom," Malik said softly, now sitting next to her, "are you okay?" Jamila smiled, squeezing her son's hand. "I am, darling. Thanks to you." Richard Holloway, the executive who had previously doubted Jamila's potential, leaned towards her. "Mrs. Carter, I'd like to know more about your project. How exactly does your app work?" Jamila hesitated for a moment, but when she saw the genuine interest in Richard's eyes, she decided to share. She took her tablet out of her bag and opened a presentation. "Our app, called VoiceLink, uses artificial intelligence to interpret facial movements and simple gestures, converting them into speech," she explained, showing the program's interface. "Imagine someone who has suffered a stroke and lost the ability to speak. With VoiceLink, that person can communicate with the world again." Other passengers began to approach, intrigued by the explanation. Lisa, the flight attendant, asked Jamila's permission to use the plane's sound system to share more about her work. With a nod from the pilot, Jamila suddenly found herself in front of an unexpected audience of over 200 people. Taking a deep breath, she began. "My name is Jamila Carter, and 3 years ago, my mother suffered a stroke that left her unable to speak. It was seeing her frustration that my son Malik, then 13, came up with the idea for VoiceLink." Malik, by her side, blushed with pride as Jamila continued her story. "Together, we started developing an app that could give a voice to those who have lost it. Not just for stroke victims, but also for people with nonverbal autism, ALS, and other conditions that affect speech." The cabin was absolutely silent, all eyes fixed on Jamila. "But our dream goes beyond technology," she continued, her voice charged with emotion. "We want to make this tool accessible to everyone, especially in underprivileged communities that are often left behind in technological advances." Frank Peterson, the passenger who had started the earlier ruckus, stood up timidly. "Mrs. Carter, I have a nephew with nonverbal autism. How could this help him?" Jamila's face lit up. She explained how VoiceLink could be customized to the specific needs of each user, allowing children with autism to express themselves in ways that were previously impossible. As Jamila spoke, something extraordinary began to happen. Passengers began to share their own stories, of loved ones affected by neurological diseases, of struggles with communication, of hopes for a more inclusive future. What had begun as an impromptu presentation turned into a moving dialogue about overcoming innovation and the power of empathy. When Jamila finished, the cabin erupted in applause. Tears shone in the eyes of many, including Richard and Frank. At that moment, thousands of feet above the ground, Jamila realized that she had achieved something even more valuable than a financial investment. She had touched hearts, changed perspectives, and, perhaps most importantly, reignited her own passion for the project she and Malik had started. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Jamila looked out of the window, the skyline of the City of Angels coming into view. She knew that, regardless of the outcome of their meeting, this trip had already been a success beyond her wildest expectations. Los Angeles International Airport appeared on the horizon, its runways stretching out like silver ribbons under the California sun. Inside the plane, an atmosphere of anticipation and camaraderie had replaced the previous tension. Jamila Carter, sitting next to her son Malik, felt a mixture of emotions, relief, gratitude, and renewed determination. As the plane began its descent, Richard Holloway leaned towards Jamila. "Mrs. Carter, I'd like to make you an offer," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "After what I've seen and heard today, I'm convinced that your project, VoiceLink, has immense potential. I would like to arrange a meeting with you and my team at Tech Lumina Corporation as soon as possible." Jamila blinked in surprise. "Mr. Holloway, I don't know what to say. That would be incredible." "Don't say anything yet," Richard smiled. "Just think about it. I think we can do something really transformative together." The plane touched down gently, and a spontaneous applause erupted in the cabin, not just for the safe landing, but as a final celebration of the emotional journey they had all shared. As the passengers prepared to disembark, Frank Peterson, the man who had started the earlier commotion, hesitantly approached Jamila and Malik. "Mrs. Carter, young Malik," he began, his voice trembling. I would like to apologize again. My behavior was unforgivable. But more than that, I'd like to thank you. You've opened my eyes today." Jamila reached out, touching Frank's arm gently. "Sometimes, Mr. Peterson, it's our mistakes that lead us to the greatest lessons. What's important is what we do with that learning." Frank nodded, tears in his eyes. "My nephew, the one with autism, I always felt powerless to help him. But now, thanks to VoiceLink, there is hope. I'd like to know how I can support your project." Malik, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Mr. Peterson, how about starting out as a beta tester? Your experience with your nephew would be invaluable in improving the application." Frank's face lit up. "I'd be honored." As the passengers disembarked, many stopped to thank Jamila and Malik, sharing personal stories and exchanging contacts. Lisa, the flight attendant, approached with a warm smile. "Mrs. Carter, on behalf of the crew, I'd like to thank you for turning what could have been a disastrous flight into an inspiring experience for all of us." Jamila smiled, hugging Malik. "The real inspiration came from this young man here. He reminds me every day why we do what we do." As they stepped off the plane, Jamila and Malik were greeted with a surprise. A small crowd of passengers was waiting for them in the terminal, applauding. Among them, Jamila recognized the faces of executives who would be attending the investors' meeting the following day. One of them, a middle-aged woman in an impeccable suit, approached. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Amanda Reeves from Skyline Ventures. We were on your flight and witnessed the whole thing. I must say we're more than impressed. We can't wait to hear your presentation tomorrow." As they walked through the airport towards the exit, Jamila felt a wave of gratitude and hope. What had started out as an ordinary trip had turned into something extraordinary. She looked at Malik, who was smiling broadly, and knew that regardless of the outcome of tomorrow's meeting, they had already achieved something invaluable. They had touched lives, changed perspectives, and rekindled the flame of compassion in a diverse group of strangers. Los Angeles shone beyond the airport windows, a horizon of possibilities opening up before them. Jamila squeezed Malik's hand, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that together they could overcome any challenge. The Californian morning sun bathed the Los Angeles skyline as Jamila Carter opened the curtains of her hotel room. The city stretched out before her, a tapestry of skyscrapers, palm trees, and promise. In a few hours, she would be in front of Skyline Ventures investors, presenting VoiceLink and hopefully securing the future of her project. As she prepared, Jamila reflected on the surprising events of the previous day. The flight that had begun with tension and prejudice had turned into a journey of understanding and human connection. Her phone vibrated with a notification. It was a message from Frank Peterson. "Mrs. Carter, I spoke to my nephew about VoiceLink. He's excited to try it out. Thank you again for this opportunity." Jamila smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. Every message like this reaffirmed the purpose of her work. In the next room, Malik was finishing getting ready. Although he wasn't officially at the meeting, he had insisted on accompanying his mother. "We're a team, remember?" he had said the night before. Walking down to the hotel lobby, Jamila and Malik were surprised by a familiar face, Richard Holloway, the executive from Tech Lumina Corporation. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter, Malik." Richard greeted them with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I'd like to escort you to the Skyline Ventures office, if you don't mind." Jamila hesitated for a moment, but the sincerity on Richard's face convinced her. "Of course, Mr. Holloway. Your company will be welcome." During the drive, the streets of Los Angeles came alive. Rushing executives, street performers, amazed tourists. The city pulsed with a unique energy. Richard seized the moment to share more of his vision. "You know, Mrs. Carter, I spent the evening thinking about VoiceLink," he began. "I believe we can do more than just invest. Tech Lumina has resources that could significantly accelerate the development and distribution of the application." Malik, listening intently, couldn't contain his enthusiasm. "Would that mean we could reach more people more quickly?" Richard nodded. "Exactly, young man. Imagine VoiceLink not just on smartphones but integrated into medical devices, special education systems." The possibilities were dizzying. Jamila felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. "It's an exciting prospect, Mr. Holloway, but it's crucial that we keep our focus on making VoiceLink accessible to underserved communities." "I completely agree," Richard replied, surprising her. "In fact, I've thought about a partnership program with NGOs and public health systems. We could create a distribution model that ensures VoiceLink reaches those who need it most, regardless of their ability to pay." As they arrived at the imposing Skyline Ventures building, Jamila felt a surge of confidence. She wasn't just presenting a product, but a vision of a more inclusive and connected world. In the lobby, they were greeted by Amanda Reeves, the executive they had met at the airport. "Mrs. Carter, Malik, welcome," she smiled, then noticed Richard. "Mr. Holloway? We didn't expect to see you here." Richard smiled. "Let's just say I have a special interest in this project." As they rode up the elevator, Jamila exchanged a glance with Malik. The young man smiled, silently conveying his confidence. Jamila took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The elevator doors opened, revealing a corridor that led to the meeting room. Jamila knew that beyond those doors were people who could turn the VoiceLink dream into a global reality. With Malik by her side and Richard's unexpected support, Jamila stepped forward. She was ready not only to present her project, but to champion a vision of a future where every voice, no matter how silenced by adversity, could be heard. The journey that had begun on a bumpy flight was about to reach new heights, and Jamila Carter was determined to seize every moment. The doors to the Skyline Ventures boardroom opened, revealing an oval table surrounded by sharp-eyed executives. Jamila Carter entered, followed by Malik and Richard Holloway. The air was charged with expectation. Amanda Reeves, the executive who had welcomed them, took the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special presentation today. Jamila Carter and her son Malik are here to show us a technology that promises to revolutionize assistive communication." Jamila took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She looked at Malik, who nodded encouragingly, and then at the attentive faces around the table. Among them, She recognized some of the passengers from the flight. "Good morning, everyone," Jamila began, her voice firm. "Today, I'm not just here to present a product. I'm here to share a vision of a world where no one is silenced by adversity." She activated the presentation, and the screen behind her came alive with images of VoiceLink in action. VoiceLink was born out of a personal need. My mother suffered a stroke that left her speechless. It was seeing her frustration that my son, Malik, had the initial idea for this app. Malik stepped forward, his presence surprisingly confident for someone so young. VoiceLink uses advanced artificial intelligence to interpret facial expressions, eye movements, and simple gestures, converting them into speech in real time, he explained, demonstrating the app on a tablet. The executives leaned forward, visibly intrigued. One of them, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses, raised his hand. "Impressive. But how does this differ from other assistive technologies on the market?" Jamila smiled, waiting for this question. "Excellent question. VoiceLink is not only more precise and responsive than existing alternatives, it's also more accessible. Our aim is to make it available to anyone who needs it, regardless of their financial situation." Richard Holloway, who until then had been watching silently, intervened. "If I may, I'd like to add something. Techlumina Corporation is prepared to offer technological and distribution support for VoiceLink. We believe that, together, we can bring this innovation to hospitals, schools, and homes across the country." A murmur of surprise went through the room. Amanda Reeves raised an eyebrow. "That certainly changes the investment landscape. Ms. Carter, how do you see this potential partnership?" Jamila exchanged a quick glance with Malik before answering. "Mr. Holloway's offer is generous and in line with our vision. However, it is crucial that we maintain our commitment to accessibility. Any partnership must prioritize bringing VoiceLink to those who need it most, not just those who can afford it." The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. It was Frank Peterson, the passenger who had caused the commotion on the plane, now sitting among the investors. "If I may," he said, standing up. "Yesterday, I was a skeptic. Today, I'm here not just as a potential investor, but as someone whose life has been touched by this technology." Frank briefly shared the story of his nephew with autism and how VoiceLink could transform his life. His eyes shone with genuine emotion. As the presentation continued, Jamila noticed a change in the atmosphere of the room. The skeptical looks had been replaced by expressions of interest and, in some cases, restrained emotion. When Jamila finished, there was a moment of reflective silence. Amanda Reeves was the first to break it. "Mrs. Carter, Malik, you're not just presenting a product. You're proposing a paradigm shift in assistive communication. Skyline Ventures is very interested in being part of that journey." The other executives nodded in agreement. Jamila felt a wave of relief and excitement. She looked at Malik, whose face glowed with pride. As the details began to be discussed, Jamila knew that this was only the beginning. VoiceLink was about to give a voice to thousands, perhaps millions. The journey that had begun on a turbulent flight was now taking off to much wider horizons. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. On the hotel terrace, Jamila Carter looked out over the city that in just 24 hours had turned from an unknown destination into a milestone in her journey. Next to her, Malik was playing with the latest VoiceLink prototype, his fingers dancing over the screen with youthful ease. "Mom," Malik said, looking up with a smile, "do you realize we've just changed the world?" Jamila laughed softly, hugging her son. "Maybe not the whole world, darling, but we've certainly changed our world, and that of many other people." The last few hours had been a roller coaster of emotions. After the successful presentation at Skyline Ventures, things moved quickly. The partnership with Richard Holloway's Techlumina Corporation was about to become a reality, with ambitious plans to bring VoiceLink to hospitals, schools, and community centers across the country. Jamila's phone vibrated. It was a message from Frank Peterson. "I just spoke to my nephew about VoiceLink. He's excited to start testing. Thanks for giving us hope." Jamila smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. It was for moments like this that she and Malik had worked so hard. "Mrs. Carter?" a familiar voice called out. It was Amanda Reeves, the Skyline Ventures executive, accompanied by Richard Holloway. "I hope we're not interrupting," Amanda said with a warm smile. "We wanted to discuss some final details about the launch of VoiceLink." The four of them sat down at a nearby table, the city stretching out below them like a carpet of lights. "We've been thinking," Richard began, "about how we can maximize VoiceLink's impact, and we have a proposal." Jamila leaned forward, intrigued. "I'm listening." Amanda continued. "We want to launch a pilot program in 5 major cities: New York, Chicago, Houston, San Francisco, and here in Los Angeles. Medical centers, public schools, and community organizations would receive VoiceLink free of charge for a year." Malik's eyes widened. "That would be incredible. We could help so many people." Jamila felt a lump in her throat. "It's more than I could have dreamed of. But how will we do it financially?" Richard smiled. "Techlumina is willing to cover the initial costs. We see this not just as philanthropy, but as an investment in the future. Imagine the data we'll collect, the improvements we'll be able to make." "And Skyline Ventures," Amanda added, "is committed to ensuring that VoiceLink remains affordable in the long term. We're considering a tiered pricing model where institutions with more resources would subsidize access for underserved communities." Jamila looked at Malik, seeing in him a reflection of her own excitement and hope. That would change everything," she said softly. "Exactly," Richard nodded. "And we want you and Malik to be at the center of it all. Talks, demos, trainings, your story, your passion, is what will make VoiceLink more than just an app. It will be a movement." As they discussed the details, Jamila couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them there. From a turbulent flight to a partnership that promised to change lives, each step had been guided by a greater purpose. As the night wore on, the outlines of a bright future began to form. VoiceLink wasn't just a product. It was a promise of a more inclusive world where every voice could be heard. Jamila looked at Malik, at Amanda and Richard, and then at the shimmering city below. She knew that this was just the first page of a new chapter in their lives. A chapter full of challenges, no doubt, but also endless possibilities. A year had passed since that fateful flight, and the performance that changed everything. The sun was rising over Central Park in New York, bathing the stage set up for VoiceLink's official launch event in golden light. Jamila Carter adjusted her microphone, looking out at the crowd that had gathered. Families, health professionals, educators, and the curious, all eager to witness what many were already calling a revolution in assistive communication. Malik, now 17, stood next to her, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and nervousness. "Are we really doing this, Mom?" he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Jamila smiled, squeezing her son's hand. "Yes, darling, we are." Over the last few months, their lives had become a whirlwind of activity. The pilot program in the 5 cities had been a resounding success. Stories of people regaining their voices, of autistic children communicating with their families for the first time, flooded social media and the news. Richard Holloway took to the stage, his face beaming. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new chapter in the history of human communication." As Richard made his introduction, Jamila let her mind wander to all the lives VoiceLink had already touched. She remembered Maria, a teacher from Los Angeles, who had suffered a stroke and now used the app to communicate with her students. Of Tyler, a boy from Chicago with cerebral palsy who could finally tell jokes to his friends. And now, Richard's voice brought her back to the present, the brilliant mind behind VoiceLink, Jamila Carter. Applause echoed through the park as Jamila stepped forward. Taking a deep breath, she began, "A year ago, I was just a mother with a dream, to give a voice to those whom society often silences. Today I stand before you not as an inventor or an entrepreneur, but as a messenger of hope." Her voice trembled with emotion as she continued, sharing stories from VoiceLink users, explaining how the technology kept evolving thanks to feedback from the community. "But the real hero of this story," Jamila said, turning to Malik, "is this extraordinary young man, my son, who at the age of 13 looked beyond his own reality and saw a world of possibilities." Malik took to the stage, greeted by a warm ovation. Together, mother and son demonstrated VoiceLink's latest features, including a new interface that allowed users to express emotions through emojis and personalized voice tones. Among the crowd, Jamila spotted familiar faces. Frank Peterson was there, next to his nephew, who was using VoiceLink with a beaming smile. Amanda Reeves from Skyline Ventures nodded discreetly, her eyes shining with pride. At the end of the presentation, Jamila made a surprise announcement. Today, we're not just launching a product. We are starting the VoiceLink Foundation, dedicated to ensuring that this technology reaches every person who needs it, in every corner of this country and one day, the world. The crowd erupted into deafening applause. Jamila and Malik hugged each other, tears of joy in their eyes. At that moment, under the blue New York sky, they knew they had done more than create an app. They had started a movement. As they left the stage, Jamila reflected on the journey that had brought them there. From a turbulent flight to this moment of triumph, every challenge, every obstacle had been an opportunity for growth and learning. The future stretched out before them, bright and full of possibilities. VoiceLink was more than a communication tool. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that every voice matters, that every story deserves to be heard. And so, under the morning sun, a new era of inclusion and understanding began to dawn, promising a world where no one would be silenced by adversity. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.